This is a special partnership project between Epic History and Drake. Back in 1792, the French Revolution started a massive war across Europe that went on for an entire generation. It was a huge fight for control over Europe and the entire world. This war happened both on land and at sea. Throughout all the changing partnerships and enemies, one rivalry never ended: the fight between France and Britain. Britain couldn't match France when it came to fighting on land. But when it came to the ocean, things were completely different. Britain's Royal Navy ruled the seas just like Napoleon would later rule the battlefields. During this time, when Britain had many talented sea captains, one man stood far above everyone else: Horatio Nelson. He was brave, inspiring, and absolutely brilliant at what he did. For the British people, he became both a national hero and a living legend. This is the story of his most famous sea battle. The year was 1805. The brief peace between Britain and France had completely fallen apart, and the two enemies were fighting each other once again. Britain joined forces with Russia and Austria to create what they called the Third Coalition. Napoleon renewed France's partnership with Spain. The man who had just crowned himself Emperor of the French was absolutely determined to finally crush Britain once and for all. Britain was the country that paid for all the alliances working against him, destroyed French trade around the world, and blocked French ports from getting supplies. Napoleon had gathered a huge invasion army along the coast of the English Channel. His battle-tested soldiers would easily defeat the British forces, but only if he could control the Channel waters long enough to get his troops safely across to England. The British Navy was better than the French in both the number of ships they had and the skill of their sailors, but even the British couldn't be in every place at the same time. So Napoleon decided to use one of his favorite military strategies, bringing all his forces together at the most important spot to get temporary control of the seas. French and Spanish ship groups scattered across many different ports would come together to form one massive combined fleet that could take on the British Navy. The Emperor put Admiral Pierre Villeneuve in charge of the first part of this important mission. Villeneuve had started his Navy career when he was just 14 years old as a trainee officer, and he had served during the American War of Independence. He supported the French Revolution and was one of the very few noble officers who stayed in the Navy during those dangerous times, which led to his promotion to Rear Admiral. In 1798, he commanded the 80-gun ship Guillaume Tell during the Battle of the Nile. His ship was one of the few that managed to escape that terrible defeat. He was later captured when the British took Malta, but they released him when peace was declared between the countries. In 1804, the commander of the French Mediterranean fleet suddenly died of a heart attack, and Villeneuve took his place with the rank of Vice Admiral. When it came to personality, Villeneuve was nothing like Nelson. In 1805, he wrote a letter to the Navy minister saying, "Please remember that I never asked to command this squadron. What's more, I have always wanted a practical and useful career, not one filled with glory and fame." On March 30th, following the Emperor's direct orders, Admiral Villeneuve sailed from Toulon with 11 warships. He managed to sneak past Nelson's ships that were blocking the port and met up with 6 Spanish ships and another French ship near Cadiz. Commanding 18 ships, Villeneuve began a 5-week journey across the Atlantic Ocean. When he arrived in the French West Indies, he joined forces with 2 more French ships under Rear Admiral Meg, and meanwhile, the British were in complete chaos. When Nelson lost track of Villeneuve's fleet, he guessed the French were heading back to Egypt, so he raced off to catch them there. He reached Alexandria before he realized he had made a terrible mistake. So he turned around and headed for the West Indies, but he was now a full month behind. Nelson made the ocean crossing in just 4 weeks, which was incredibly fast. But he still missed Villeneuve by only a few days, as the French admiral had already sailed back toward Europe on June 8th. Then the British got a lucky break. Nelson sent a fast ship to carry his reports back to England. By pure chance, this ship spotted Villeneuve's fleet in the Atlantic Ocean. Their course wasn't back to the Mediterranean Sea like Nelson had thought, but further north, heading toward the English Channel. Vice Admiral Calder, with 15 warships, was put on high alert to intercept them. On July 22nd, Calder intercepted Villeneuve's fleet off Cape in confused fighting through heavy fog. The British managed to capture 2 Spanish ships, but Calder failed to stop Villeneuve from reaching the Spanish port of France. The French admiral then made a decision that would change everything. His orders were crystal clear. Go to Brest and then continue to the Channel for the invasion. But reports of enemy ships to the north convinced him that he was about to be attacked by Britain's powerful Channel fleet. His ships had been battered by Atlantic storms and battle damage, and they couldn't fight again without major repairs. So he decided to retreat to Cadiz. Instead, he was soon surrounded by a growing number of British ships. Napoleon was absolutely furious when he received this news.
Villeneuve doesn't have the strength of character to command even a small frigate. He angrily told his naval minister. It was almost autumn now, and a cross-channel invasion was completely impossible. Villeneuve had failed him completely. Napoleon had to look for other ways to defeat the British. In late August, Napoleon's troops packed up their camp at Boulogne and marched off to fight the Austrians and Russians along the Danube River. At the same time, he sent new orders to Admiral Villeneuve to sail into the Mediterranean Sea, where he was supposed to support French military operations in Italy. But his Franco-Spanish combined fleet was in terrible shape. They were short on supplies and men, and they were completely surrounded by a powerful British force now, commanded by Admiral Nelson himself. Villeneuve decided to stay where he was and not risk a battle. But when Napoleon told him that he was being replaced as commander, the French admiral was finally pushed into action. On October 18, 1805, he ordered the Franco-Spanish fleet to leave port and head out to sea. Admiral Villeneuve's combined fleet was made up of 33 warships, 18 French and 15 Spanish ships. Admiral Villeneuve's command ship was the 80. The Spanish ships were led by Admiral Gravina, sailing on the Príncipe de Asturias, which had 112 guns. Nelson had been waiting for the enemy with 34 warships, but he had just been forced to send 6 ships to Gibraltar for supplies and repairs. Vice Admiral Calder, sailing on HMS Prince of Wales, was sent home to face a military trial for his poor performance at Cape Fin. So Nelson was now slightly outnumbered, 27 ships against 33 enemy vessels, though he did have 3 powerful first-rate ships. His own command ship Victory, the Britannia, and Vice Admiral Collingwood's Royal Sovereign. Both fleets also had several smaller, faster ships for scouting and carrying messages between the larger vessels. On paper, the Royal Navy was heavily outgunned by the enemy, but the British knew they could count on better seamanship and much faster cannon firing to balance out the disadvantage. After 8 weeks stuck in Cadiz, Villeneuve was finally back at sea, but he had given his own captains very little warning about their sudden departure, and he had chosen to sail in light winds that weren't favorable for sailing. As they slowly moved south along the Spanish coast, British scouting ships spotted them. These fast ships quickly carried news of the enemy's departure to Nelson and the British fleet, who were patrolling 40 miles off the coast. Nelson immediately changed course to intercept the enemy fleet. On the morning of October 21st, Villeneuve's fleet was about 10 miles northwest of Cape Trafalgar, heading for the Straits of Gibraltar. When the British fleet was spotted closing in from the northwest, Villeneuve faced a terrible choice. He thought about running for the Mediterranean Sea or facing the British in a direct battle, but in the end, he ordered his entire fleet to turn around and sail back toward Cadiz. This sudden change in direction, combined with the light winds and many inexperienced crews, caused the combined fleet's formation to become extremely messy and disorganized. The fleet now formed a rough crescent shape that stretched over 5 miles of ocean. Both mentally and strategically, Villeneuve's fleet was already at a serious disadvantage before the battle even began. The difference between the two fleets couldn't have been more obvious. Admiral Nelson's sailors were ready to fight. They had been waiting for this moment, and their commander had prepared a daring strategy that would change naval warfare forever. By 11 in the morning, the British ships had arranged themselves in battle formation. They moved toward the enemy fleet, commanded by Villeneuve, though the weak wind made their progress painfully slow. Nelson had spent weeks thinking about this attack. Most naval commanders at the time would simply line up their ships next to the enemy and exchange cannon fire back and forth. This traditional method often ended without a clear winner, which frustrated Nelson greatly. The British admiral had chosen a much bolder approach. He would split his fleet into 2 separate groups that would charge straight at the enemy line. These columns would punch through the French and Spanish formation, breaking it into smaller pieces. Each section could then be surrounded and destroyed before the front ships of the enemy fleet could turn around to help. This plan came with serious risks. During the long approach, the first British ships in each column would face heavy bombardment, while being unable to fire back. Their guns would be pointing the wrong way, leaving them defenseless. Nelson knew this danger well, but he decided to lead one of these vulnerable columns himself aboard his flagship HMS Victory. The second column would be commanded by Vice Admiral Collingwood on HMS Royal Sovereign. As the British fleet began moving forward, Nelson wanted to send an inspiring message to his men. He originally planned to signal to England confides that every man will do his duty. But the signaling system made it easier to say, England expects that every man will do his duty. This famous message would echo through history. The light breeze meant both British columns crawled forward at only 3 knots, barely faster than a person walking on land. The leading ships would have to endure nearly 3/4 of an hour of enemy fire before reaching their targets. This would test the courage of every British sailor. The battle began at noon when the French warship Foucault fired the first shots at Royal Sovereign. Soon, the entire combined fleet of French and Spanish ships was thundering with cannon fire. However, their gun crews lacked proper training, and their ships rolled heavily in the wind because they were positioned sideways to the breeze. Most of their shots flew wide of their targets. Nelson raised another signal on Victory's rear mast. Engage the enemy more closely. This flag would stay there until enemy fire eventually destroyed it. As the distance between the fleets shortened, the French and Spanish gunners began hitting their marks more often. Round cannonballs tore through the sails of both Victory and Royal Sovereign, creating holes everywhere. Wooden beams and masts crashed down onto the decks. Victory's steering wheel was smashed by a direct hit, making the ship harder to control. British casualties began mounting as more shots found their targets. Twice, other British ships tried to move ahead of Victory to shield Nelson from enemy fire, but the admiral ordered them back into their proper positions. Nelson aimed to break through the enemy line right next to Villeneuve's flagship. Attacking the enemy commander directly was part of his ruthless battle strategy. Unfortunately, the French and Spanish ships were not in a neat line, and many lacked the flags that would identify which ship carried which admiral. Nelson had to make his best guess about which vessel held Villeneuve. Luckily, his guess proved correct. Around 12:30, HMS Victory was positioned to smash through the enemy line just behind the Bucentaur. However, Collingwood's faster-moving Royal Sovereign would actually break through first, further south in the battle line. The British had kept their cannons silent during the entire approach. They had suffered under enemy fire for 30 minutes with no way to strike back. That was about to change dramatically. Every British gun had been loaded with 2 cannonballs instead of 1, doubling their destructive power. HMS Royal Sovereign passed behind the Spanish ship Santa Ana and unleashed a massive broadside into her unprotected rear. This devastating attack sent cannonballs the entire length of the enemy's ship, causing terrible damage. A few minutes later, HMS Victory sailed behind the Bucentaur and delivered her own crushing broadside. This single attack crippled Villeneuve's flagship and killed or wounded nearly half of her crew. Despite these 2 powerful opening blows, the lead British ships found themselves badly outnumbered and in serious danger. Collingwood's Royal Sovereign came under fire from enemy ships on all sides. The second ship in his column, HMS Bellel, had all her masts shot away, leaving her helpless. HMS Mars was also taking heavy punishment from multiple directions. HMS Victory became entangled with a French ship called Reed, which carried many skilled Marines trained for close combat. In the fierce hand-to-hand fighting that followed, the isolated British ships at the front had to hold on desperately until reinforcements could reach them. After 20 dangerous minutes, more British ships began arriving one by one to join the fight. They crashed into the confused enemy formation, firing their double-loaded cannons with devastating results. Victory finally received much-needed help when HMS Temeraire arrived alongside her. As each new British ship entered the battle, a massive brawl developed among all the vessels. This chaotic close-range fighting was exactly what Nelson had wanted. The enemy's ships could not escape and were being pounded at point-blank range. Meanwhile, Admiral Dumanoir's French and Spanish ships at the front of their original line had begun turning around to rejoin the battle. However, their painfully slow maneuver would take more than an hour to complete. HMS Africa, a smaller 64-gun warship, had earlier become separated from the main British fleet. Her captain, Henry Digby, received Nelson's order to withdraw to safety, but chose to interpret it differently. Instead of retreating, he charged straight into the battle from the north. HMS Africa sailed alone past the entire enemy vanguard, exchanging cannon fire with every ship she passed. Then she joined the attack on the massive which carried 136 guns and was one of the largest warships in the world. Victory and Redoubtable were now locked in brutal close-quarters combat. British cannons smashed the French ship's hull into splinters, while Redoutable's crew gathered on deck to board and capture Victory. At this critical moment, HMS Temeraire appeared on Redoutable's other side and swept her deck with grape-shot small metal balls that acted like a giant shotgun. The French boarding party was cut down instantly. All 3 ships became tangled together and drifted into another French vessel. Some French and Spanish ships, like Admiral Meek, had used their time in port wisely to train their crews for boarding attacks and close combat. This preparation made them dangerous opponents in hand-to-hand fighting. However, time and again, just as a French or Spanish crew formed up to board a British ship, another British vessel would emerge through the thick smoke of battle. These rescuing ships would sweep the enemy decks with grape shot, killing the boarding parties before they could attack. Superior British gunnery skills were slowly wearing down their opponents. One by one, the the first French and Spanish ships began lowering their flags as a sign of surrender. The British were winning through their superior training and aggressive tactics. At the height of the fierce battle, a French marksman positioned high in Redoutable's rigging spotted the British commander on Victory's. Nelson was easy to identify because of his bright military decorations, which he had refused to remove despite advice from his officers. The sniper fired a single musket shot that struck Nelson in the shoulder, before traveling down through his spine. They finally succeeded. Nelson said, "I am dead." His men carried him below deck for medical treatment, where he continued receiving regular updates about how the battle was progressing. To the south, the French warship Aquileia, under attack from several British ships simultaneously, had caught fire. The flames spread quickly through her wooden hull and rigging, creating a spectacular and terrifying sight that could be seen across the entire battlefield. In the northern part of the battle, Dumanoir's advanced ships were finally ready to fight. But something went wrong with their plan. Only one ship called actually tried to attack properly. The rest of the French ships just fired a few shots from far away, then turned around and sailed off instead of getting close to fight the British ships. This made the Spanish sailors so angry that they wanted to shoot at their own French allies. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The French ships quickly moved away from the fighting area. They could tell that their commander Villeneuve's fleet was losing badly. More than 12 French and Spanish ships had already given up and surrendered to the British. Down below on HMS Victory, Admiral Nelson was dying. He lay on the lowest deck of his ship, barely alive. He knew his time was running out. Nelson whispered to his dear friend Captain Hardy, asking him to look after Lady Hamilton, the woman he loved. Then he said those famous words, "Kiss me, Hardy." After a few quiet moments, Nelson spoke his final words, "Thank God I have done my duty." Soon after, the great admiral died. Around 6 in the evening, something terrible happened at the southern end of the battle. The French ship Aquileia had been on fire, and the flames finally reached where they stored their gunpowder. The entire ship exploded in a massive blast that killed half the crew instantly. This shocking explosion marked the end of a battle that had killed 5,000 men. By now, everyone could see that the British had won a complete victory. Out of 33 French and Spanish ships that started the fight, 17 had been captured and 1 was completely destroyed. Several British ships were badly damaged, but amazingly, not a single British ship was lost. The number of dead and wounded told the same story. Admiral Villeneuve was captured along with thousands of other prisoners. The British let him return to France, but 6 months later he was found dead. Nobody knows for sure if he killed himself or was murdered. The Spanish commander Admiral Gravina managed to escape from the battle, but he died from his wounds 6 months later. For the British, their amazing victory was spoiled by losing their brilliant leader Nelson. As Nelson lay dying, his last order to the fleet was to drop their anchors, because he was worried about bad weather coming. He was right to be concerned. A terrible Atlantic storm hit soon after the battle ended. The storm battered the winning British fleet and all the ships they had captured. Strong winds howled for days, causing complete chaos. The storm scattered the battle-damaged ships across miles of ocean. The French and Spanish forces saw their chance and tried to take back some of their captured ships. French warships managed to recapture the Spanish ship Santa Ana, for captured crews fought back against their British guards and took control of their own ships again. But 3 of these ships were driven onto the shore and wrecked by the storm. Even though the British worked incredibly hard, they could only save 4 out of the 17 ships they had captured. The rest were either burned or lost in the storm. The terrible weather probably killed more French and Spanish sailors than the actual battle did. The bad news for France kept coming. 2 weeks after the main battle, Admiral Dumanoir and his 4 French ships that had escaped were caught by Captain Strachan's British squadron near Cape. All 4 French ships were captured, making it an incredible 2 weeks of victory for the British Navy. Nelson's body was brought back to England on HMS Victory. They preserved his body in a barrel of brandy and tied it to the main mast of the ship. Nelson became the first person who was unroyal to get a state funeral in Britain since the Duke of Marlborough 83 years earlier. For 3 days, Nelson's body was displayed in the Painted Hall at Greenwich Hospital. Thousands of people came to pay their respects. Then his body was moved by boat along the river to St. Paul's Cathedral. The funeral procession was enormous. It included 32 admirals, 189 carriages, and thousands of soldiers. Nelson's coffin was made from wood taken from a French warship called L'Orient. They placed it in a stone tomb in the cathedral's underground crypt. It took 4 weeks for news of the Battle of Trafalgar to reach Napoleon, who was near Vienna at the time. He was on his way to win his own great victory against the Russians and Austrians at a place called Aust. Both battles happened in the same year, but Trafalgar would have much bigger effects on history. The Battle of Trafalgar was one of the most devastating victories in naval history. The battle didn't actually save Britain from being invaded, because that danger had already passed, but the huge scale of the victory meant that Britain ruled the seas without challenge for the remaining 10 years of the wars against Napoleon. Napoleon had to find other ways to try to defeat the British. This path would lead him to make serious mistakes that would eventually cause his own downfall. For Britain, controlling the seas after Trafalgar gave them the power to build their empire throughout the entire 19th century. This was the age when Britain dominated the world as the leading global empire. The Royal Navy wouldn't face another serious challenge at sea until the Battle of Jutland, more than 100 years later. Right now, many people are wondering whether artificial intelligence is making online videos better or worse. You might have noticed a flood of new documentaries with cockpit scripts, robotic voices, and completely wrong pictures. At Epic History, we have always used real people and promised to keep using skilled human teams. This ensures everything we create is reliable and authentic. From research to scripts, animation, and narration, real humans do all the work. If you're tired of searching through poor quality AI-made content just to find something worth watching, then maybe it's time to check out Nebula. It's a premium streaming service where you'll only find high-quality videos made by real people. Nebula has hundreds of great creators covering all types of subjects. Whatever you're interested in, you're guaranteed to find something you'll love. They have original movies and entertainment series, plus documentaries about science, technology, travel, true crime, and of course, history. The history section shows just how much Nebula offers, including special Nebula originals that only subscribers can watch. If you like our channel, we're sure you'll also love Real-Time History's amazing collection of military history documentaries. They have recent episodes about Desert Storm, the Vietnam War, and their brand new video called U-Boats Unleashed, the Battle of the Atlantic 1940. Just like our videos, all of theirs are available to Nebula subscribers first and without any ads. Nebula is a streaming service built by creators to offer a better experience than other video platforms. Right now, it's the most interesting and fastest growing independent video platform on the internet, because Nebula fairly pays its creators. Signing up actively supports channels like ours, as we work hard to create even more ambitious history content. Plus, we have a great discount for Epic History viewers. The link in our video description gets you 40% off Nebula's yearly plan. That's just $36 a year, or $3 a month. Even better, the Nebula Lifetime Plan offers lifetime access with no strings attached for $300. This helps Nebula fund more of its original creator-owned series. Thanks to all our existing Nebula subscribers, and for everyone else watching, we hope to see you there soon. Big thanks to Drake Kineful for expert research and advice throughout our series on Nelson's battles. For anyone interested in naval history, his YouTube channel is essential viewing. It's packed with profiles of historic warships and expert discussion of naval technology and operations. Thank you to Jack Fine Art and the estate of Derek Gardner for permission to use his painting of the battle in this video. You can view more of his fantastic paintings online using the link in the video description. Thanks as always to the Patreon supporters who help make this channel possible. From builders like Trey Tatro, Ellington Total War, and Neil to citizens like Casual Donor, O_M, and Drew, and heroes like William Fowler. Join their ranks by joining us on Patreon, where you'll get early ad-free access to new videos, exclusive updates, and votes on future video topics.